Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're talking about this new term that they created a while back called vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, VITT. We're in the American College of Cardiology, the Cardiology magazine today. And we're talking about vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia and COVID-19 vaccines. What cardiovascular clinicians need to know for their patients. So, it's the same study here. I highlighted a couple of parts. It's more detailed than the other publication. So a series of 35 individuals with confirmed vaccine-induced thrombosis after taking the COVID-19 vaccine. The studies determined that they were suffering from thrombosis and blood coagulation for an 11-week period, most of them. And 14 out of 15 of the patients 14 out of the 15 patients were better after 12 weeks, meaning they didn't have any more clotting or as much clotting. And this ELISA assay determined that the titers were declining but did not become negative in most cases. So these individuals, the thrombosis or the clotting potential did not become negative in most cases. So these patients recovered mostly, but it was still in their blood, the coagulation factor, whatever the mechanism is. So 5 individuals went on to receive the RNA vaccine rather than the adenovirus vaccine. And as their second dose, because of the thrombosis induced by the first dose, and they continued to receive anticoagulation agents for their vaccine-induced thrombosis. And because of those anticoagulation medications, none of the patients had a reoccurring symptoms of vaccine-induced thrombosis. So it says here the mechanisms by which the implicated vaccines trigger the development of new antibodies is unknown. Preliminary theories include the possibility that components of the vaccine, including the virus proteins and free DNA, bind to the body's PF4 binding sites and generate a neoantigen. So what is a neoantigen? I typed that in here. A new protein that forms on cancer cells when certain mutations occur in tumor DNA. Neoantigens may play an important role in helping the body make an immune response against cancer cells. So it's really interesting that they're creating these neoantigens in the vaccine, and it says it is currently unknown which of the 1,000 component proteins in the vaccine may play a role in this platelet activation that causes the coagulation or the vaccine-induced thrombosis. So we're going down here. PF4 is a positively charged tetrameric protein in our cells of the body. And these PF4 molecules are supposed to repel each other, but in the presence of negatively charged polyanionic molecules such as heparin or endogenous polyphosphates, PF4 may form higher order structures that act as neoantigens. So there's talking about the conversion pathway from the vaccine-induced thrombosis to the neoantigen formation. It says here DNA and RNA also have a polyanionic properties and may create neoantigens when bound to PF4. So as the immune system is being excited or induced or activated by the vaccine-induced thrombosis and the immune response from the COVID-19 vaccine, this PF4 tetrameric protein becomes activated and starts cranking out these neoantigens. So let's go down and see what the body does with these PF4 antigens. Anti-PF4 antibodies cause pancellular activation, meaning that besides activating platelets and coagulation reactions, the antibodies activate monocytes, leading to tissue factor expression. Neutrophils leading to netosis, and endothelial cells leading to tissue factor expression. Activation of these other cell types further contributes to the higher risk of thrombosis. So once we engage the anti-PF4 antibodies as a result of the immune response to the vaccine-induced thrombosis, which comes from the COVID-19 vaccine, you have this cascade of biological mechanisms happening. And it says here in this medical study that they all they all contribute to a higher risk of thrombosis. So it's kind of like a snowball effect. So it says thrombosis in vaccine-induced thrombosis can occur in typical sites of venous thromboembolism, such as pulmonary embolism. So I typed that in, pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot that develops in the blood vessel in the body, often in the legs, and then it travels to the lung, where it suddenly blocks blood flow. So the VIT can occur in typical sites, creating pulmonary embolisms or deep vein thrombosis in the leg. However, a distinctive feature of the syndrome is thrombosis in unusual sites. So vaccine-induced thrombosis creates these features in unusual sites, they say, including the splenic veins. And I typed that one in, and it's an unusual formation of venous thromboembolism, which involves one or more of the abdominal veins. Yeah, very unusual. So these are the huge veins that go up to our major organs here. Alright, so stay with me, guys. We're talking some funny words here today. So, yeah, so the syndrome and unusual sites in the splenic veins, the adrenal veins, which causes a risk for adrenal failure, which is definitely not good, and the cerebral and ophthalmic veins. So I typed those in too. So the cerebral veins drain the brain parenchyma and are located in the subarachnoid space. So that sounds pretty important, right? And judging by these pictures, these cerebral veins are also very important, which the vaccine-induced thrombosis tends to block these cerebral and ophthalmic veins. So what is that one here? Okay, the veins of the eye. Two vessels that drain the venous blood from the structures of the orbit into the cavernous sinus. I guess on the way back to the heart. That's interesting. Okay, so arterial thrombosis, including ischemic stroke, is also found in these patients with vaccine-induced thrombosis, often the middle cerebral artery. affected in these stroke cases caused by the vaccine. And so this middle cerebral artery is again one of these giant arteries, very unusual in the brain. So it's creating these blood clots in these really big arteries, which is very unusual because normally they talk about the microclotting in the conservative propaganda. But I didn't really ever hear about these bigger arteries becoming clotted. So let's go on here. So yeah, and often this peripheral arterial occlusion also occurs in individuals with venous thrombosis. So yeah, that's what they're talking about, the snowball effect here. So the pathophysiologic explanation for these unusual sites of thrombosis is currently unknown. Interesting, right? The distribution is similar to what we see in unusual thrombophilias, such as in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, PNH, and it's associated with possibly a JAK2 genetic mutation. And it says here's the kicker: autopsy studies in individuals who have died from vaccine-induced thrombosis have demonstrated catastrophic venous thrombosis involving multiple large and small vessels. So yeah, that's what we just went over here. All of these really big blood vessels are getting clotted up somehow, probably because of that PF4 factor as the antibodies are attacking the blood. So just to recap here, this is a kind of a complicated one today. I appreciate your patience, guys. So these patients were okay as soon as they were administered anticoagulation medications from Big Pharma, and none of them had reoccurrence symptoms. And so now we're in this situation where we need all these anticoagulation agents to simply gain the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccines. And so we see here in June 2021, the FDA conveniently approved the first oral blood thinning medication for children, because we're seeing a lot of these young men especially having these blood clots and chest pains and heart issues when they receive the RNA injections as well as the adenovirus injections, probably because they all centralize around the spike protein, which again in the previous video we talked about affects the ACE2 receptors in the body. So yeah, if anybody is having these kinds of unusual symptoms that you know who has received any of the injections, it might be the case that they will be experiencing this thrombosis, venous thrombosis, vaccine-induced. And so they would most likely need anticoagulation agents, just like the individuals in this report today of COVID-19 vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia. Thanks, guys. Word salad for you today. See you in the next one.